Hello, good creatures, and welcome. My name's Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Hello. So, in this episode, we're going to be discussing relationships, experience, and identity.
You and I are at really different stages in our lives. You are just kind of entering into the beginning of the peak of your career. I am in the denouement of my career, post-peak. We're at different places in terms of our relationships as well, but both of us right now are going through big life transformations. And I think that's one of the things that we've kind of built our friendship on over time is the fact that both of us have been through lots of different transformations throughout our lives. And as hard as those things are, we both really enjoyed the process of transformation. So we've been having a lot of conversations about that lately. And we had the idea that maybe we should just record one of these conversations because it may be of interest to other people. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about what it is that has been on your mind as you have been thinking about your own transformation this weekend.
Yeah, I think for me it plays into sort of the intentions we have. And whether you know it or not, you are living for something, and it can be under the backlog of what you're intentionally or cognizantly aware of versus what's something that's driving you intentionally or driving you systematically from patterns of the past per se. And I think for me, it's the context. I was actually really thinking about this recently, is that I've actually, in the last 5 years, been in almost 7 different timelines in a sense. Like when I was living in Nanaimo, and then I moved to Grand Prairie, and then I went from Grand Prairie to Edmonton, and then Edmonton to New Zealand, and then New Zealand back to Edmonton, then to Red Deer, then to Calgary. So that's like 7 different timelines. And so I found myself just what could be for me, in a sense, one aspect of rock bottom when I got here. And it's kind of like this, in some sense, this contrast was really weird because I'm at the peak of a professional career in a rocket of success in a professional sense, but then find myself relationally at rock bottom. And I think that probed a very interesting reflection point for me. So where it transitioned into kind of one of the things I was thinking about today was I was doing a journal prompt on what chapter of my life is ending and what part of me is holding on to it or struggling to let it go. And that played into like a pretty big I would say conversation with myself to get to some of the big points. And this played into me. It really played out into almost 4 different things that I saw in a commonality of, for me, this turned into not just what is a chapter that's closing. I think for me, it's almost narratively a book, like where this, a massive part of my life with multiple different chapters, and then on a theme sense, this point closed a lot of it, and that I'm almost on the precipice of a new book per se. And that's kind of think where the rock bottom played out. And then so for me, it played into pursuit, relationships, experience, and loneliness aversion, where I think for me, it really was after my mom passed away. I think that's where this thing started. And I think it's weird when you look back at life and you see what's the hindsight view? It's 2020. But you don't always see certain things. Like it's like you can see these big picture things, but there's something that you always say that I really like. And it's the statement with, you'll relive the same experiences over and over again until you learn them, not just because you became aware of them, you learned them. And so what this played out to me was this story that started when my mom died. Is it had been on the back end of my bodybuilding career. And I think for me, bodybuilding really played out into an external motivation where it was something that if I accomplished this, then this would be worth it. And for me, this became this 1-in-1 equation. Like if I die of ALS and I become a pro bodybuilder, okay, we made it. And what became this black and white pursuit. And I think for me, that was a point of a chapter of the pursuit. And then when my mom died, it made me question everything. And so it really became this what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it right now, but this big change in not only the way I was living, but how I was thinking about things. And then so my mom died, and I hadn't seen her in over a year. I'd been so consumed with the pursuit that I stopped going home. And then it obviously played out into this scenario where I kind of chose the pursuit over going to see her over Christmas. And then she passed away. And then that played into this massive moment where I started reflecting on everything. And I did a lot of thinking here, and then this played into what was now the search. So it's almost like the pursuit had failed me in a way, that accomplishing things had left me devoid of meaning, and the back end of why I was pursuing was something that was externally validating versus intrinsically meaningful to me. And then this became this massive change, and this started the search. So that's a big thing for me. Before I get into some of these aspects, did you have any points in your life that played into this sort of like eclipse moment where a long pattern of time had played out where you'd been living a certain way and something happened and it started to flip the script for you and you started living in a different way or questioning the ways you had been living?
Absolutely, yes. More than once. I think that things, every now and then something will happen that it's like you put your head down, you're living your life one day, like you said, one way, you're kind of living a particular pattern. Maybe you're even accomplishing things until something happens that kind of gets you to sit back and say, wait a minute, what have I been doing? And is this really still aligned with my values? I think it's one of those things that I think, because I know both of you and I have reflective journaling practices, I think that that's one of the things that having a reflective journaling practice can help spare you from getting too far down a path before needing to course correct. Because I also think that life evolves, right? There may be periods of time where living your life in one way works for you, and then you hit a stopper, and then it causes you to sit back and reflect and go, and then that's the moment you check in and realize, like, okay, it was once important to me, but it's not anymore. Particularly with those, like you say, those things that are externally motivating versus internally motivating. I think one of the biggest ones for me, and like I've got a bunch of them, work-wise, personal life, relationship-wise, a couple that come to mind for me is, one is that when I was working in my first career and really unhappy. So my first career was in human resources. I worked for a large corporation and in their payroll and benefits administration department. I was just like an HR peon in their payroll and benefits department. I loved what I did. I was really good at it. As you have pointed out a few times, like there's a part of my brain that is really analytical or very blue in that color wheel personality kind of orientation. And so my brain really did well with that kind of work. It was very analytical and data driven. And I liked my coworkers very much, but the company didn't value me. It wasn't a career that was necessarily going anywhere. It wasn't fulfilling me in terms of feeling like there was a bigger purpose or meaning. And not that you need to get your sense of purpose and meaning in life from your career. I know lots of people don't. My brother is often fond of saying that you work to live, not live to work, that you need to keep work in perspective, that it doesn't need to be the end all be all. And for me, I was in a place where I was just very dissatisfied with my life overall. And I realized that part of what had landed me in that career was this pattern of kind of following a path of least resistance in terms of what opportunities are available to me, what am I good at that comes really easily, what doesn't require me to jump through too many hoops to get there. And that's how I ended up in this career that was kind of like, it was good enough. I had stock options and I had a pension and I had like benefits, and it was like a meager salary, but it was still like better than a poke in the eye. And I was very dissatisfied. And it was in that moment realizing that it was in taking this path of least resistance, I was artificially limiting the potential of what I knew damn well I was capable of. I knew I was absolutely putting limiters and a ceiling on the potential of what I could become in my life if I was willing to take a harder path, if I was willing to be a beginner, to be bad at something at first, to take a little bit of a risk, to put myself out there and try and do something that I might not succeed at automatically, that I might have to put in some effort for it. And to then really put some time, effort, money, and ego at risk in order to pursue something else. And it took me, even once I realized that, it took me a long time to commit to doing it. But I am so fucking glad that I did commit to doing it, because then it radically changed my life in terms of where I've ended up, which is to say that I have a career that has filled me with all kinds of sense of meaning and purpose and good connections. And it is something that I am good at. And it draws on more than just the analytical parts of my brain. So that's the thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the catalyst of change, which was one of the earlier words I was looking for me, was my mom passing away and not getting to say goodbye to her, and seeing some of the error in how I had learned to escape from my suffering from when my dad passed away and things surrounded by ALS. And it's like this catalyst moment for you was kind of like, it's almost like boredom, but a lack of meaning. That you were in something that kind of like, it just kind of like hit everything, but it wasn't as meaningful or as challenging to you as what you felt you were capable of. Is there anything else that it was for you? Because you kind of made a face.
Yeah. Because if I'm going to be honest, like that was part of it, and it was a big risk. And I don't think I would have taken that risk if it hadn't been that there were some other factors that then finally are the things that kind of shoved me out of my comfort zone, which is to say that I had some, in trying to fill that void, another pattern I had going on in my life was a series of problematic relationships that I had pursued and that were just really bad for my mental health and my self-concept, and that were not bringing my life fulfillment. They were bringing my life a lot of drama, which was interesting and engaging and occupies a lot of time and emotional energy, but it's not actually fulfilling. And in fact, it was quite highly toxic. And it was kind of on the heels of that. It was a combination of, I had one coworker who became quite enamored with me and fixated on a relationship with me that I was not interested in. And he began a 5-year period of like pursuit and harassment in trying to get me to change my mind. And then I had another person come into my life who woefully misrepresented himself and was turned out to be a narcissist. And it kind of in the revelation of realizing, like, so I'd had this one person in my life creating a lot of toxic drama, and then I had another person in my life that I thought was wonderful, and then kind of had the rug pulled out from under me, and was just realizing, like, okay, relationships is just not, it's also not where it's at. I need to do, and so that's where then finding meaning in my career became much more meaningful to me, because where I thought I was going to find meaning was in relationships, and then I was like, you men are crazy. Like, I need to find my meaning elsewhere.
Okay, all right. There's so much there that I actually didn't know. You've told me this story, but I didn't connect it to the dots there, because it plays out into like some of my philosophies that are so true in how I see the world. That
Tell me your
like,
philosophy.
Well, it's like that we have to have, like, to find happiness, one of the nodes we need is the pursuit of something that is meaningful enough to suffer through, that there's suffering that is meaningful to us. And the pursuit of this task, the suffering that plays out to it becomes actually not a problem to it. It's actually just part of the process. It's part of the journey. But so what it makes me think of, it's that at that point you were relying on to these interpersonal relationships to fill what was the meaningful aspect of your life, because that wasn't happening at work. And then this went chaotic, and I'm really sorry you had to deal with that. That's crazy. And that motivated you enough to just take a totally different career path and across the country, no the less, totally uprooted your whole existence. And it's like, on a reflective point, I would never have wanted my mom to pass away. And at that point, you would never have wanted to be played those points of tragedy. But then a lot of times, on the hindsight, they become some of the biggest catalysts for what would be a positive change in your life. So it's like that for you. I don't know what your deliberation on that is, like, if you would have one-on-one exchanged this harassment for the life you have now. I imagined you wouldn't say exchange those, like not have this suffering, but then not have the life you have now, because what would be the worst the concept is that you would have continued in that life of unfulfillment and externally related motivating factors over time, to a point that you never noticed it. Like, it's like that maybe you reflect on it at some point. But it's funny because it's unprompted perfection to this conversation, which I really like, because it's exactly, it goes on for the point of, like, kind of the search for meaning. So for you, in a lot of places, that kind of became a professional pursuit, motivated by meaning and finding something worth suffering for. Is there any pursuits for you? Well, I guess you kind of answered that question. So I think one of the things for me that has played out for you in the pursuit of your career, that played into an aspect where you probably had to really deal with a lot of loneliness, because then there was this point where you did move across. I'm assuming at this point was when you moved across the country.
It was after I finished all my schooling. So I moved to a different city to go to school, and then I moved to a second different city to go and do my master's degree. And then after I finished my master's degree is when I moved across the country to follow my career.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I sort of quested in this what would be this chapter that I just went through, that is now closing, is this loneliness aversion. This seemed to be something that I have really, really struggled with, and not necessarily put myself in relationships that I wouldn't have wanted to have, but that I was willing at any cost to avoid loneliness, and even compromise on some of my value sets to avoid this specific type of loneliness. And for me, it seems to play into something about psychological safety with a partner, that I seem to not feel safe under my own self-validating factors, per se, that not having a partner seems to cause some psychological insafety to me. Not necessarily panic, but like stress and anxiety. And that always played into a point where I would say I could even compromise on values to protect myself from this loneliness. And now this is at a point where I realize that one of the things in that timeline, that chapter seems to be ending now, because now I've been forced into, in a way, this bout of loneliness. And I've actually found myself doing things that I never would have normally done while I was in a relationship, that makes me see that these things should be even present in a relationship, because of not having all my needs be met by one individual, but that I have a life that's fulfilling to me in multiple dimensions. And so one of the things for me that I noticed in loneliness is that boredom, one, and then stirring into creative endeavors that, for me, I've been spending a lot more time journaling, but then on a Saturday, going downtown early in the morning to do a run club, and then going and having a random chat at somebody with a restaurant, because we're two people that were there alone. And it's almost like I'm taking myself on a date. And then I was open to a conversation and had an interesting conversation with somebody at a burger place. But after I kind of finished that, and then I went and did a workout, this is say this Saturday, did a workout, and I actually, it was interesting because I was happy with the day. Like it felt like a good day. But I had this reflection point where I realized if I was with somebody, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have made those connections. And I think it's, if you have a partner, it's obviously extremely valuable that you spent time with them. But I think one of the things I noticed here is that some of these concepts in the things you do alone, you form this identity, and that becomes kind of the aspects of you as a person that maintains your own well-being, and that a partner should add to that, and shouldn't be, say, part of that, that you guys are interdependent, that you move through together. So I know that you spent a lot of time alone. So for you, what do you think are the biggest factors that played into you overcoming what would be like loneliness aversion, or even just time by yourself? And so what played into you overcoming those things? What do you think are the biggest things you gained from that time being alone?
Yeah. Let me start by saying that I want to first recognize that you are in a really tough place right now, where you are in a place where it is sometimes lovely and sometimes boring, and you are pushing yourself way outside your comfort zone in order to make a life that is rich and bigger and fulfilled, both with and without a partner. Because it's not easy to do, having done it a few times myself. I did spend a lot of time alone because on the heels of, and like, just because I don't want to get into all of the trauma and details of what the relationship madness was at that phase in my life, let's just suffice it to say, like, it was batshit crazy and could be a whole episode of drama on its own. But I was really exhausted at that stage. And honestly, I felt hopeless about the prospect that a relationship could give me any kind of peace in my life, like that there could be real love that wasn't characterized by drama or deception or brevity, right? And so it wasn't a decision I made lightly to be alone, and I was quite lonely. I was also at a stage where I was in my kind of having these thoughts was in my late 20s, and then making the decision kind of in my early 30s. And as a woman who wanted to have a family, that's peak childbearing ages. And so I struggled with making that decision because it felt like a really substantial life choice to make. Like, it felt like I was at a fork in the road, and that whichever path I chose, there was going to be consequences. Having said that, though, I ultimately chose the path of pursuing career, because to choose the path of relationship and in hopes of family, like I said, I was feeling a little bit hopeless about it. And I also felt like I could not be the entire author of my life in that way. When you put all your eggs in the basket of I need a partner to be happy and to be fulfilled and to have the life that I want, it means that your fulfillment and your happiness is dependent on another person, and that their presence or absence, or their health or lack of health, dictates whether or not you are happy or fulfilled. And I had just realized the fundamental error in thinking that way, and that, like you, realize that that there are certain things you need to have a partner in your life for, but many of the things, the responsibilities for our own happiness and meaning, and even how we spend our time, that we place as responsibilities onto our primary romantic relationships, actually don't properly belong on our relationships. They are our responsibility to take care of. So things like being socially networked, getting out and having new experiences, meeting people, having different friend groups and things like that. So I think realizing that there were many of my needs that I could get met outside of relationship, and then pursued those things. So pursued finding different friends. And what I love about the life I have built, and it takes a long time to build it, and you'll try and initiate friendships with some people and it just doesn't work because of misalignment of schedules, or because as you get to know each other, maybe your values don't align. But still, you pursue it just the same way as you would pursue dating. And you find that there are some friends that I have that are, say, my book club friends. And I have been in this book club for more than a decade now, and we see each other every 2 months. And a couple of the ladies I see outside of book club, they're friends in addition to book club, but some of them I only ever see at book club. But I love every single one of those women. I wouldn't trade them for the world. And they meet some of my needs. They don't meet all of my friend and social needs, but they meet some of them and a really core piece. And then I have other friends that I do other things with. That I have friends for gaming, or friends that are kind of interested in the same kind of personal development that I'm interested in. Or, you end up collecting different people serve different places in your life. It kind of is that there's that saying that it takes a village to raise a child. I think we are meant to be people who live nested in villages, that there's not a single person or just a couple of people who meet all our needs. I think the idea of village life for humans is that we're supposed to have whole communities of people, and that we get different needs met in different places, and that's a big part of how I have staved off the loneliness. But that doesn't mean that there weren't times that were lonely. And also, then there's, separate from that, the process of disentangling what it means to be alone, and that being alone is not necessarily lonely. But I would like to ask you to reflect on that nuance for you as you've been experiencing this.
I reflected so much while you were talking about that. Made me think of a lot of things, because like by DNA, we're not supposed to be alone. Like it's like we learn to survive in groups. And then not being in groups is going to cause real psychological harm and not well-being. Like you need to have a community. I think what is happening in our society right now is we're getting increasingly more isolated because there's more things that meet those needs outside of it. They're actually starting to have whole terms for groups of people in different areas who are spending more than months without talking to anybody. Like, that's crazy. That's nuts. And that because they're finding these, it's a big problem in Japan right now, actually. It's sort of related. It's something, it'll play into my thinking, but that we have people who you can order your stuff to be delivered to you, and it can be contactless delivery. You work from home, and then your social groups, gaming, other aspects are in online space. And I think there's so many things that play into this. Like, we want to feel connected to people. We want to have physical touch. We want to have eye contact. We actually want to be in front of people and have them see us for who we are. But I think that one of the things I noticed here is that that loneliness and the way you sort of replaced aspects with a pursuit, and then you also really focused on building relationships that fit your needs that existed outside of an intimate relationship, because you didn't feel like an intimate relationship was. I think there's a couple things that could play into that, like whether you felt like it was possible or whether you felt like it was valuable for you at that time. I imagine there's a whole bunch of different scenarios that played over that timeline. But what it made me really think of is the importance of developing relationships outside of your intimate relationship, having a pursuit that's meaningful for you intrinsically, but also reframing what is loneliness versus I like the solitude reframe, that when you spend time peacefully alone, that you self-clarify. I think it's like it plays into some of the books we've read, but boredom. When you're bored is the foundational point to creativity, because you are bored, so you find something to do. What it really reflects to me is that I negated relationships. And I think to preface this is that the closing of this chapter or book is what I framed it. I spent a long time unhappy. And I think when I think about, like if I just would have tracked a wellness survey over the last 5 years of my life, I think there would be some real low points. And a lot of points that not necessarily there's like anything really wrong. Like I've gone through financial struggle. I lost my mom and dad. I've gone through a whole bunch of different things, but it's like on one aspect, I've been fine. Like I like to, and this is all played out into my philosophy, that when you're well of body and sound of mind, you're going to be okay. like you're going to be able to figure it out. You have the physical capability to go out, get a job, whatever it is, whatever you need to do. You have the physical capability and the mental well-being or mental capability. You're kind of going to be able to figure it out. But there's a big difference between survival and thriving. And I don't think over any point the last 5 years I was thriving at one point. And I think one of the things I really focused on is a pursuit and experiences over relationships. I think this is one of the biggest differences in this chapter, where when my mom died, I started leaning into experiences, and man, this went all over the place. This could be, and this played into some of my, like I'd watched my dad die of ALS, and I don't think that was a psychological light point. I think that stuck with me for a long time, because when I found out my dad was diagnosed with ALS, I did a lot of research, and then my dad's dad and his 7 brothers or sisters all died of frontal lobe dementia or ALS in their 60s and 70s, and my dad died of ALS in his 50s. So I saw my worst nightmare playing out with my dad, and I was pretty sure that was going to be my reality too. And I don't think that on reflection, that was not a light cost. Like, that stuck with me and it changed my behavior. And I think one of the things when it first played out was this pursuit of bodybuilding and mental mastery, almost like this David Goggins like thinking that I could overcome anything. And like, there's this video that plays in social media that always sticks out to me, and it just, the way he says it, he was like, and I was at rock bottom, and just the way he says it, I reflected on it. And I think that was extremely valuable for me, because I think what was the cost of that on the other side is bad. Like, I go off the deep end. I don't know where that goes without some sort of pursuit to deal with that, because I think in a lot of ways it's like, it showed me the impermanence of life, one, but it was something I was real scared of. Like, it gave me this impermanence aspect, but then this thing that was like, really made me question sometimes, like, what's the point? Like, it's like, what's the point? And I think when it first started, it was really dark. And I think for me, from a philosophical standpoint, when you play into optimism, my optimism now is only because of the nihilism that created. And so when my mom died, I think it was the first probe that I wasn't taking care of a community, connections, or relationship. Like, it was like the first probe where I was like, ooh, like, I haven't seen my family in over a year by choice. Like, it's like that I left my hometown. I wanted nothing to do with them. And it's almost like this it goes into deeper things, but this one-on-one point where it's like, there's this aspect I'm running from. And if I achieve something, it'll make my life meaningful. And it became a destination and an outcome. And I think for me now, reflecting on it, it's a fallacy in a lot of ways, because now what I know is that I would have needed those relationships. But it's interesting to reflect, because I think it played out in kind of this whole chapter or book per se, is how I reflected when my mom died. And then this whole chapter up until now, I think I spent a lot of time prioritizing novel experiences and achievements in my pursuits over relationships. And I only had 1 or 2 relationships that I really put any effort into, which is kind of crazy to think about. When I really think about it, I think there's 4 people in that 5 years that I put any effort into. And that's interesting, because I was so focused on what would be the highest experience related factor, because I'm going to die someday, so I should just have a lot of really good experiences. And then, but I'm also going to die someday, so then I want to be somebody. Like, I want to be something. And if I achieve that and I have a lot of experiences along the way, then that would have been an equal exchange. And I think that for me, it's really interesting, because I can see this sort of pattern of self-isolation, but then also this sort of strategy to avoid future pain through achievement and experiences, but then further put me into patterns of loneliness or self-isolation that I didn't want to find myself in. And so that's what your journey reflected to me. It's like you had a better strategy, I think, for coping with certain things than I had. Not necessarily in like obviously there was a lot of struggle on your end of things, but I think one of this just even thinking that I can fill certain needs with relationships and find meaning through myself, that I think played in, that was really productive. But looked like you had something to say in there.
Well, a couple things. One I think is there's part of your strategy that was also just kind of developmentally, I think, a normal phase lots of people go through. You went through it for kind of existential reasons, but I think it's a lot of people go through a phase in their life where they prioritize experiences over people. And it's not that people don't matter, it's that we take people for granted. It's not like you were consciously like, people are bullshit and I don't care, I'm just gonna like live my life and collect all of the tokens of novel experience. That's not what you were doing. But what you did is you deprioritized relationships, taking them for granted, just assuming relationships will be there when I need them, kind of thing. But life has a way of kicking us in the ass, because like you say, you didn't go home to see your mom at Christmas, but you hadn't gone home to see her in a year, because when your mom's in her mid-50s, you just assume she's going to be there next year. It's no big deal, right? We take it for granted. And then quite suddenly, for both of us, our moms were no longer there. And it's only in hindsight that we can then see, like, I didn't prioritize that in the way I would have liked to. And there's another piece of this that is about how sometimes we get into these patterns that become self-fulfilling prophecies, that the very behaviors we are engaging in are creating the conditions that we are afraid of. So, for example, I was like, when Nate talks about me being alone, I was single for 15 years by choice. And there were moments of that were lonely, but then there were also times where probably the story I was telling myself was that people are terrible and it's not worth it. But because I wasn't making myself open or available to pursue any kind of relationships, I was so closed off to it that I didn't take a chance to even get to know people. It meant that I was blocked from ever encountering or meeting anybody or open myself up to the possibility. And so it became the self-reinforcing thing. The longer it went on that I wasn't meeting anybody, the more I entrenched the belief became that there were no good people out there. And so what would be the point in trying to date anyway? Ultimately I got out of that thinking, because spoiler alert for the listeners, I'm married. So I got out of that eventually. But I think we do get into these self-fulfilling prophecy cycles. So for example, with yourself, is that you were maybe pursuing like novelty of experience and downplaying the importance of relationships in hope of finding some kind of like sense of meaning or purpose. But the very thing that you were turning your back on was the place where you were likely to find the meaning and the purpose and the connection that you were looking for from those other experiences anyway. But I think that's such a human thing. The important thing is that you see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I think it's this, you'll continue to relive the same experiences over and over again until something changes. But 100%. It's like you have this cognitive dissonance to this cycle, like that you don't see it, but then you experience the back end of it over and over again. And I think one thing, it sort of plays out into this sort of where I said almost relationshiply rock bottom. For you, there was a rock bottom that played out as well. And it's like at that rock bottom, I think you've suffered so much that it's like anything is better than continuing to fall prey to this same suffering again. And I think that's where this hopelessness comes from. And it's almost like good God, how have I found myself here again? And then so you have to really look at it, and you start being willing to rip some things apart. I think for me, it's funny that you said that, because it just played out into some of my relationship back ends. And we had talked about this. Like when I went to the run club, I was sitting in my car and I was like, I don't need this. Like, this is embarrassing. Like that's what my brain thought. Like, I'm so needy that I need to go out and like meet people that like I don't need this. Like, this is below me. And what's interesting is, because it's like, did that thinking serve me well? And as I caught myself doing it, I was like, is that a good way to think about this? And I just observed it, and I said, okay, no. What's my main priority here? Is I'm here to meet some people because I'm fucking like isolated. Like, this doesn't feel lonely. I feel isolated. And I think some of the context is that, say, I've been in all those different locations, but not prioritizing my relationships, and then losing the very relationships that I'd put everything on. I then found myself in a new city with knowing nobody, and then having nobody but Petrina. And then, I mean, Liam was here too, which was good, but it's almost like I had no community and no connections. And then my work that I was doing in Red Deer took care of a lot of those things. And then my work now in Calgary is a little bit on the back end. So I'm not in the clubs every day.
Not as social.
So so it's not as social. So I was literally like, my goal here is to meet some people, and I could go out there and everybody could point and laugh, and I could do this 6 times. And if I met a couple people, it would still have been a win. Like, I don't have to meet anybody today. Like, it's like, this is just to start putting myself in places that I wouldn't normally have been, which is why I found myself in the situation that I'm in. But then, so it's interesting, because I had played it into this type of thinking that wasn't productive to me, and I had to observe it and challenge it. And then that day I ended up cornering down somebody, meeting somebody. They brought me into a group, and then I ended up spending 2 hours at a coffee shop after, having a really good conversation, and I had a much better day. But it's interesting, because you can sort of play into those cycles over and over again, and you'll play into this suffering from kind of the back end of that cycle. But then, even when you're trying to escape it, it's like you're I don't know if everybody's heard the crab bucket analogy, that humans do this too, but you have a crab bucket and a bunch of crabs. The one crab tries to climb out, all other crabs pull him back in. But it's like, so you get this social crab bucket type thing in friend groups. I think it's interesting to reflect little side quests on my, like, of course, I've been bad at this, because I've been in so many environments that were really hostile to the things I wanted to achieve. And it's like, I had to crawl out of that crab bucket, kick other crabs away to get out of the bucket. But then, say, now it's like, you can do this crab bucketing to yourself in your own head. Like, it's like, not only is maybe this environment not hospitable to you, and you keep playing into the same cycles, but then you're also gonna beat yourself up psychologically when you try to escape it. And I think it's really interesting, because
Well, I was just gonna reflect on that, because I think we could apply this to friendships and that kind of social groups, and we could also apply it to relationships, which is that, like, for me growing up, living in the small city that I did, I never felt like I fit in. I never felt like I belonged. And I would say I was always surrounded by people, because you go to school, you're in high school, you're surrounded by people, but feeling profoundly alone, and just never feeling like I fit in, never feeling like I belonged, and not feeling surrounded by people, and some of them like good, decent people, but not feeling like I was really understood, or that I had a profound sense of belonging with those people. And then it took me a long time to get out of that. And the same thing in intimate relationships. If you're in a relationship with somebody, but you feel like it's not good for you, or it's not the right fit for you, in both those instances, it's places where you have people in your life, but you feel alone. And to me, that was always worse than actually being alone. I would rather feel lonely because I'm actually alone, rather than being surrounded by people and feeling lonely. To me, that was infinitely worse. And I think that that's part of what pushed me to, like, be willing to be single for a while or be willing to like move clear across the country. And it was also the thing that then made it so that when I moved back into trying to build community for myself and also start dating again, that I was really selective about who I was going to let in, because once I got comfortable with being alone, it was hard at first, but I just reminded myself of how terrible it felt to be surrounded by people that were like the crabs in the bucket trying to pull you down. And not that the other crabs are bad, but that's not your bucket. That the competition is, once you get comfortable with feeling comfortable alone, then it's who could I bring into my life that adding them to my life feels better than being alone. Because there's some people that when they come into your life, it's worse than being alone. And I was vigilant about protecting my peace and not letting those folks in. And at the same time, sometimes then we can get into these things where, and I'm so glad you were able to just observe the thought in the moment, where there's a part of you that was judging yourself. Well, you were being your own crab bucket in that moment, trying to hold yourself back from maybe going out and meeting some amazing people that day.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a couple things that kind of made me think of, is that it's like we're almost proven, like there's like a lot of research on this. The book I'm reading that we're going to do a big discussion on, I think is really interesting, but it references some research on people and transit buses. And so it's like that, and that they ask all these people, they're like, would you want to talk to somebody on the public transit? And everybody's like, absolutely not. Like I would, there's a lot of things I would rather do than that. And then what they do is they have this scenario, and they actually probe a conversation with these people. And then they everybody rated a better experience on the transit talking to this random person than they did without talking to the person. And I think it's really interesting because it plays into sometimes where we get really, really good at things that are not good for us. I think that's like kind of this whole concept, I think, which sort of I determined, or I sort of thematically called it the search, is I think that's the whole point, is becoming a whole person and moving your way up in this almost wisdom of the world. You come up on certain stages where you're like, okay, what was good for me? What was bad for me? And then it's like this constant evaluating, because I think it's like, well, I might have sort of kiboshed a lot of relationships. I also spent a decade pursuing something consistently that is then now paid off to me into is almost like a point, whereas I never thought I would get here, and this is pretty good. So I almost didn't even know what to do about it, because for me, I always just wanted a stable career in fitness that paid me what I felt like I was worth, but also that paid me enough that my needs would be met. Like, it's like, I don't need anything crazy. I don't want to be really just stressed out about money all the time. And I think so for me, work became this thing that was what's meaningful to me, and then what compensates well, like that covers the bases. I think because it plays into me, I just cannot stand doing something that's not meaningful to me. I'd rather shoot myself in the head, like I did. And it plays out into this when I was living in Nanaimo. I did 2 weeks of overnight stocking shells. Oh my god, like that was the longest 2 weeks in my entire life. And then I got this mobile security job that didn't pay anymore, but I got to drive around in a car and deal with like shenanigans. And I had a fun time doing that job. But so for me, one of my quests was, it always has to be meaningful. I always wanted to create a career that was meaningful for me. And then so over the last 3 years, I saw, a decade of pursuit then play into almost 3 years of a rocket of success. And then boom, I found myself in this place that it's like, okay, my work's meaningful, I'm being compensated well, and I actually think I could stay here. It's like and that made me feel really weird. It's almost like the first week at work I felt unmotivated. Like, it's like I achieved it, but then now something's lacking. It's like I don't have any relationships here, that now this success had then provided me a safety network or stability that I'd never had. And then now the other thing that I wanted to be here isn't there. But it's like, I would never have exchanged that, because now I'm more equipped. Like, it's like, I'm just an overall better character. Like, if we were at a video game, I have more skills. I'm better emotionally regulated. Like, I have more wisdom. There's more stats. I'm more financially taken care of. I'm independent. Like, I can take care of myself. There's all these stats, and I wouldn't have exchanged that for anything. Now, if, say, I had a relationship over that time, sure, but I wouldn't have exchanged where I am now to something that wasn't good for me. I think it plays into something that you said that I really liked, or you sent me a thing, and it's like, you want the right thing slowly versus the wrong thing now. And I think it's like, that's one of the things that I took away from this, is that we both were willing to take that jump. And I think it's so important for anybody who's listening here to also take that jump, because the suffering that you endure in the fogginess of what is that path that you didn't know is always an equal exchange on the other side, because there's nothing worse than kind of regretting the path you took than jump off that cliff. It's like, if you hit the ground, you won't ever regret jumping off the cliff. But I think it's almost like, there's lots of times I imagine this analogy where it's like these points in my life where I don't know what's on the other side there, but it's whatever is on the other side is better than I am where I'm at right now. And I think it's important for you to take that jump, because you'll infinitely have a better return, because you become, I think it's like it's almost, you become a better character. There's no more wisdom. You go on a journey that was exciting to you versus something that slowly eats away at you over time. And you can always see the person who's passionate and excited about their future versus like dead inside and they've given up. And I'd much rather be somebody who goes through some fear, some anxiety, some stresses on the thing that you jumped off the cliff, rather than losing hope. But then I think it's like, that's the next step, is when does it become an identity and it's meaningful for you, other than a pursuit of external validation that I am valuable. For you, is there anything that you can think of in your life now that is played into something that's more of an identity to you, that is meaningful, that also, say, propagates success and meaning, but is not an externally validating pursuit anymore?
There's two things that immediately jump to mind. One is personal, and I think that's the one I'm going to go with. You and I both know, in terms of behavior, we're both people who are in our careers have supported people through big behavior change, and an important factor that needs to kind of take shape in order for somebody to really stick with behavior change is that they need to see the new habits or behaviors as a part of their identity. It's just who they are. We've talked about this before, but I think for me, it bears repeating, just because it represents for me a radical shift in my own identity. Is when I first met you and I came to you and you were my personal trainer, that in that moment, going from somebody who is really unfit and out of shape and overweight, like I was deconditioned, under-muscled, and overweight, and physically really not in great condition, and did not see myself as somebody who was athletic, did not define myself as like an athlete. I was somebody who was willing to put myself through the grueling torture of going to the gym and working out because I knew it was good for me. And I wanted to make some of the pain go away, but it was kind of like, it was a thing I was willing to put myself through in order to get an outcome. But over the course of doing that, what made it stick was that I stopped thinking of it as an exchange, that I exchanged my sweat and my effort in exchange for not being in pain and being slightly less fat. It instead became that I go to the gym because it's part of who I am, not just that I started to enjoy it, because I don't enjoy it every single time, but I do it because that's who I've become. It's who I am now. And internalizing that identity as somebody who is athletic and fit. And it completely changes the equation, because now it's not transactional. I don't go to the gym to get something out of it. I go to the gym just because it's who I am. It's not just that it's become automatic, but that if I don't go, I miss it. Like I had surgery 6 months ago now, and kind of within a couple of days after surgery, I was out getting my steps again. And within a week of surgery, I was back in the gym doing a lot of modified things, but I was back in there. And there was no anxiety about getting back in the gym. Like I didn't go back because I was like anxious about like losing my progress or anything like that. I went because I missed it and because that's where I wanted to be. I hope that answers your question, because I think you were asking about like what identities have I kind of taken on and how has that changed my life. Taking on the identity of somebody who is fit, that's part of how I see myself now, that I own that, has radically changed my lifestyle. And not only that, but like it's improved my mental health and it's improved my relationship, because I also got my husband to adopt that identity for himself. And so it has changed our lifestyle, has changed our prospects for our future. And it's been wonderful. How about you? What identities would you say you have been adopting for yourself?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. It's one of the things, I think you got to be aligned with the mission of your company. I think that's meaningful for me. And say Good Life's purpose is to elevate the quality of life through movement and connection. And I really like that company purpose. I think it's very aligns with my philosophies that one, community and connection is extremely valuable, because you want to have that supporting cast. You want to be seen. You want to be part of a community and a group. And there's lots to it, but it's just like, we live in a physical world. Like you need your physical capabilities. And if you don't do physical things, you will not have the physical capabilities. And it's almost like now in our society, we started to take something for granted. And then that's why we're seeing such massive problems. People getting heavier and under-muscled over time. We're seeing sarcopenia in lower ages than we've ever seen before. Obesity rates are skyrocketing. And with the low muscle mass, it's getting bad. But it's because most people, it's just like our needs are taken care of. So you have to have these physical stresses, and they're not in your life anymore. So you have to train. That's just how it is. I think that's something that broad society taken for granted. But for me, it's actually kind of a similar thing, but just more, for me, it's like bodybuilding and training and everything. It became the coping mechanism, but it's almost like training was something early on established that was positive. Bodybuilding was an externally validated endeavor that I don't think did me well over time. Some aspects I think were good. Like it taught me a lot. I think the being able to get sub 5% body fat, you have to endure starvation and overwork. And I think that taught me a lot about how far I could push the line per se. But I think the drug use and the narcissistically highlighted pursuit, it's just like it's ingrained in that to start to get almost too consumed with your physical appearance, because now the physical appearance becomes the sport. And if you don't play the game, you'll end up burned at the end. Like if you get too consumed with how big you can get and how lean you can get, and you just get too consumed with that endeavor, it's going to have consequences. And so I'm not going to go into that aspect. But then for me, I don't think bodybuilding was ever constructive, but I got constructive things from it. And then so for me, bodybuilding and training that way was an externally validated endeavor. And even then, when I had, say, switched from bodybuilding to more athletic training again, and even basketball, it's like basketball is to be a better basketball player, but then get up further leagues. And then when I started introducing athletic training, it was like, oh, okay, let's do Spartan races and let's do marathons. It's like immediately these other outcomes played in. And then it's like over a little bit, I would say over the last 2 years, it just like it's always been an identity, but the cardio training, the resistance training, the power training, like all the dimensions of training, those started to just become what I do and not because of any pursuit. Like it's just like they maintaining a 10K volume per week of running is just good for me because it maintains that quality over time. And then so then I can run. And it's like I don't need to do 20K. It's like that 10K is fine. Now, I think throwing an outcome on something could be valuable because it's just fun to push yourself. But if you can only get to the gym because of an external validation, you haven't really learned the principle of what's really valuable about fitness and training. Like if you need to be motivated by something you're chasing, it's external. Having an external validator, I think, can push us sometimes a bit further than we otherwise would have. But what's the floor? Like if this pursuit is the ceiling and our floor doesn't exist without this show, this endurance race, this whatever, if that's not there, that our floor just doesn't exist, we're not going to do that for very long. And I think for me, it was with training too. It just sort of started to become this identity. And then I started to have different qualities that it felt meaningful for me to uphold. And then training became more of this performance related thinking to the ways I wanted to experience life versus this outcome driven pursuit. And I think so training, it was similar, but it's just like, it's almost my training age is quite old already. Like I've been training a long time. And then, so then now it's like the different evolution of the principle, but kind of similar. Yeah.
You're this old sage at the top of the mountain of training, dispensing wisdom. But there's that saying they say about like with any journey, it's not about getting to the end of the journey. It's about the person you become along the way is kind of the whole point of any real journey. And I really like that.
Yeah, me too. I think actually on like, I've almost like a closing principle. At the beginning, it's like my question was, what chapter of life is ending? And that kind of became a book.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about this pursuit. And I think for me in this conversation, there's something that stood out to me with some debates with AI and some things that on some clarifying of some journal prompts. It brought something to me that I thought was really interesting, that it said there's almost a hidden belief underneath your actions that say, if life is fragile and temporary, I must maximize experience, possibility, movement, and intensity. And I think, and then it had, but another part of you is starving for rootedness. The tragedy is that the strategies you use to avoid future pain are producing the very loneliness you fear. I think it's really interesting to me because I think this was an important chapter closing, because it was one where I'm no longer escaping and I'm starting to learn how to just live my life meaningfully. I think a big thing is, for me, I was always in instability when I was young. And I think to get away from that, I had to learn to control myself and rip myself from that bucket. But then I think when my dad died of ALS, and then there posed this impermanence, but a permanent, like an impermanence that I'm not going to live forever, but this thing, like you don't escape this thing. I think it just played into a lot of aspects of escaping. And then so I started, if this is temporary, then I'm going to have to maximize everything. Like what's the most success? What's the most experience? What's the most intensity I could feel? But then that eventually is sort of now has left me sort of devoid of stability. And I think for me, what's being closed is that chapter where I try to escape this, and that I need to maximize intensity, and I start creating some rootedness in my life and start to actually create something that I'm not trying to escape anymore, and create something that is hopefully meaningful to me. For you,
I'm just going to reflect the wonderful part about being at rock bottom, because being at rock bottom is often a terrible place to be. It feels like a terrible place to be. But the beautiful part about that metaphor of being at rock bottom, it means you've hit bedrock, which means you are now on solid ground where you can start building a foundation for yourself that is not built on sand and it can't get ripped up from underneath you. You are in the place where you can now build.
Yeah, when you said that to me, it really stuck with me. It actually was really helpful. For you, in kind of some of the aspects for you that you're moving through a chapter that's closing and you're transitioning from sort of this professional endeavor into more of almost like this personal professional endeavor?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say would be the sum in what's ending and what's starting?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. My transition is going to happen slowly. My position at work is going away, and it looks like I'm going to take an early retirement option, just to give their listeners some context. And as I said on a previous episode, just because the job goes away, like, I'm not an occupational therapist because my employer gave me that job title. I'm an occupational therapist because that's who I am. That's my professional identity. I have the experience. I have the license. And it has become a big part of who I am and how I see the world. So that's something I take with me when I go, and I'm going to continue working. The thing that changes, though, is there is a transition away from having credibility or authority based on my affiliation with an institution. Especially working for, I don't want to name my employer, but I work for one of the largest health services employers in Canada, and it is a name that has some weight to it when I tell people I work for this organization. And so just by telling people, if they know nothing else about me, but they know I'm an occupational therapist and that I work for that organization, it carries some weight. There's some authority that I have by virtue of affiliation with that name. And really realizing that as I step away from that, my authority is not diminished. Because my authority was always my own. It was based on my experience. I was the one doing the work. I was the one with the wisdom and the experience. I was the one getting the results. And so the authority is mine to take with me, and really just internalizing that. So now I'm not going to have kind of that authority through affiliation. It is me having to internalize it to say, I own this. I'm not saying like, yeah, it is my organization's authority or my position's authority. It's mine. And I am needing to kind of like get rooted down and stand my ground in the truth of that, which is not always a comfortable place to be. I think I am somebody who does have the courage of their convictions, and I have never been afraid to speak up. You know, I am an opinionated person, and I will tell people my thoughts. And at the same time, I think that sometimes being in a helping profession, that there is sometimes like it's unseemly for a person to have to even like toot their own horn, to say that they're good at what they do, to say that like, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm really excellent at what I do. That feels so egoic. And at the same time, I also know that it's true. So it feels like it's, so I'm adopting this I'm taking on the mantle of like, I'm not a big deal because of affiliation with this big fancy organization that impresses people. I'm a big deal because actually I'm kind of a big deal. And I'm getting comfortable with owning that, and then figuring out like, how do I own that in a way that still feels authentic and that doesn't reek of hubris or of ego, and like that does actually keep it in perspective. Because as much as I know I'm really good at what I'm doing, part of what makes me good at it is that I am absolutely a lifelong learner, and I know that I am never done learning, and I will never be perfect. There is always room for feedback, and there's always room to grow. Anyway, I feel like that's the transition I'm going through, is that I am disentangling my professional identity from my employer. And while there's been some things about that have been clear in terms of how I see myself, part of it has also been about then being willing to own my own voice, and that I have authority and I keep using that word. I wish I had a different word for it. I don't know how else to express it, but like
I think authority is good because it's almost like everybody's trying to establish an authority in a given concept. Because I think it's like that's the whole game. It's like we start a task and we want to get good at the task, and then it's almost like this world has then now like the baselines are covered, so mediocrity is accepted. But in a previous realm, that wouldn't have been the case. If you're not the best blacksmith, you might lose. Like it's like where now it's like baseline's covered, mediocrity is accepted, and then so that's left a bunch of people who think we should all be mediocre. And so I think you take that egotistical thing, throw it out the goddamn window, because if you've established like learning and authority through receipts and not resumes, you have a proven competence in this task. And it's like that's the definition between a master and the novice. It's like when you first start the task, you think you know everything. And then the deeper you get into the task, the less you think you know. But as you start to become actually an expert in that field, you then gain confidence again. But then that's the always learning mindset versus a closed mindset, which is, I think that's where sort of some of the ego aspect comes from. But I think you've definitely established what is the base to say you are competent in this task. And I think authority is good because it's like you've proven competence. So now you've established an authority that exists outside of what the institution is. And I think that's a huge transition because most people don't even take that jump, which is now another proven ability in your expertise that you were confident enough to take that jump.
Yeah, thank you for reframing that for me, because I actually think it then echoes something you were talking about earlier, this idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, right? And now it's also, I had an extrinsic authority, but now I'm making it, I have an intrinsic authority. I own it and I am taking it with me when I go. That is the transition that I am going through for the balance of 2026.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I reflect on that, it's kind of like, I can see where some of the aspects have been reverse engineered in our path lines in certain sense, where it's like I almost had to establish an intrinsic authority around health and fitness and training. Not that I necessarily had to, but that if I didn't have that, and now I'm leading other fitness professionals, like what am I leading? I don't even know what I'm talking about. But I think I had such an established authority that's why I went from fitness manager and then to divisional manager so fast, is because I had this established authority that existed outside the concept of this institution. And it's funny because it made me reflect. I was like, oh, you know what? That kind of makes sense where I would have gone like this, because it's like I had one of the things in I think, my leadership that's really strong is my power of influence. And my power of influence only comes from my conviction on my trade and my path. And I think that was interesting to reflect on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is absolutely something you brought into your career. Your employer didn't give that to you. You brought it in with you, and it fed your success. Cool.
Yeah. Well, that was an awesome conversation because it actually I really liked covering some of those points. It made me think of a lot.
Thank you for suggesting this, Nate. It was a really great idea.
Yeah, thanks for the chat.
Now, tell me, where can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
They can find me at Nate Bolding on primarily, I'm going to start getting more live on Instagram and TikTok. And then you can also find the Creatures We Become on Instagram and TikTok. And where can our friends find you?
You can find me at Petrina Calder, both on Instagram and TikTok. We post the podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify.